Hello and welcome to our webinar on Keeping Children Safe in Education 2025, or KCSIE for short, where we're going to be understanding the updates and helping to prepare your school. So the updated guidance was published earlier this month, and there were some key items of note, such as an emphasis on cyber resilience standards, clarified expectations of filtering monitoring linked to prevent duty, DFE meeting digital technology standards in schools and colleges, and working together to safeguard attendance became statutory, and lots of other changes which we will cover in the webinar of our guests today. There were some things schools may have been expecting that they didn't get, such as updated guidance on gender questioning following the CAS review, and child sexual exploitation following the KC audit. But it just simply notes in the guidance that these will be in revised versions. So it's possible schools can expect another update at some point with these, and some other bits of guidance it has mentioned will be in future iterations as well. But for today, let's just dive into the crucial changes, particularly ones focusing on digital safeguarding with our guests. So first of all, I would like to introduce our first guest, Al Kingsley, MBA, who is the CEO of NetSupport, Chair of Hampton Academies Trust, a best-selling author, speaker, DFE Advisory Board member, and an expert in all things education, AI, and EdTech. Welcome, Al. How are you this morning?
I am fine, and I was with you until you said that word expert, which I might challenge.
Oh, I think that everyone will probably agree with me on that. But there are lots of other hats I know you have, but we won't go into them because that will cut far too much into our webinar time. So I'm going to introduce our next guest, Mark Anderson, who is the Head of Education at NetSupport, another best-selling author, former teacher and school leader, and an expert in all things digital strategy, implementation, and safeguarding. And again, you have more hats, Mark, but I'm just going to welcome you as that for now. So welcome. How are you?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'll join Al actually in the whole expert thing too, but I'm sure we'll work that out as we work through the questions.
Absolutely. Well, I guess part of being an expert as well is always being willing to learn and discover new things. So we can go with that too.
100%.
All right.
Yeah.
So the first question really is for Al, which is, now that we've had time to actually digest KCSIE, what do you think are the most significant changes for schools this year?
Well, bearing in mind that I've reached the age, Kat, where once I've read something, I've normally forgotten it within 24 hours. I did try to remember the most important bits. So I'm quite relieved.
I guess what sticks might be the most key things then.
Well, I think, there's the whole thing, which is, everything from the working together to improve school attendance, which is something that's been a really big push. And that's now become formally a sort of a safeguarding matter. There's the expansion of the 4 Cs online, not a new concept, but something that's been expanded to clarify inclusion of misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories, and the bigger picture. There's something that's wearing lots of different hats for both Mark and I relevant. The signposting of the DFE's filtering and monitoring standards, something that's been around a while, but for the first time we see generative AI product safety expectations lined up in there. I would still argue maybe still a little bit woolly given the ever-shifting sands, but it's the first time we see it in there. There's updates from an RSHE perspective there, with further strategy changes required again in 2026. Things that from previous roles I've had leading chairing alternative provision, there's changes there and expectations on safer recruitment. Changes to SEND reform, just some subtle things like removing the words spectrum and disorder, which I think is long overdue. Kinship care, those children with other family members rather than with parents, and some of the focus around that, as well as that broader questioning and RSHE as well about, the broader sense of what's happening when it comes to everything from gender questioning to actually the role of AI and how we discover it. So quite a lot on the plate, really. So I'm guessing this is a 7-hour discussion we're having today. So
it could well be with that amount of significant changes, couldn't it? Yeah, well done, Al. I think you encapsulated that very well, because there was quite a lengthy list, so I'm impressed. And you remembered a lot more than you thought, so well done. Mark, bearing those updates in mind, particularly where they intersect with digital safeguarding and technology provision, how can school leaders prioritise those?
Yeah, I'm mindful of something that somebody we all know shared with me on a webinar for us, actually. If you want to watch it back, please do check out the NetSupport webinar series. I had a great session with Gary Henderson once. And the thing I think that he shared in there that I took away from that was, you know, you can only really ever hope to be more secure than tomorrow than you were today. And so the thing I would say really is, you know, looking at where you are with your provision, you know, tightening up your systems and making sure you have evidence. Al brilliantly mentioned the filtering and monitoring standards that are really sort of drawn a spotlight in the KCSIE 25 document recently again. And so start with that, run your annual review, see where you're at, and make sure you can demonstrate your provision is proportionate, you know, and then move to your cyber resilience and, you know, work to fix up any patching that needs to be done, any access controls, make sure your backups are secure and set up as they need to be. And then the final piece really, I think, is just make sure that you are really clear on refreshing staff training. It's a statutory requirement that staff have that, but, you know, as we all know, you know, a half-hour session once a year on your first inset day back, which has already gone anyway, right, doesn't make for, you know, good professional learning. So think about how you can make those really key things that need to be shared with staff, and not just teaching staff, but, you know, all colleagues, making sure that sort of becomes part of the fabric of what you do every day. You know, safeguarding isn't something that happens, you know, in isolation. It's everyone in education's responsibility to keep focused on it, and so make sure that becomes just part of what you do every single day, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense, Mark. It's kind of, you know, the way that schools need to be cyber resilient, for example, is ever evolving. So it makes sense that the training is going to be continuous as well for schools and ensuring all stakeholders are involved. Building on cybersecurity and resilience in particular, Mark, KCSIE strengthens that link between safeguarding and the DFE cybersecurity standards, as Al had mentioned before as well in his update on the priority changes. What practical steps should schools take this term to improve their cyber resilience?
Well, like I share with Gary's thing there about becoming more secure in every way that you can every day. So being mindful of doing things like having strong it's shouldn't really need to be said, right? But, you know, having secure passwords, making sure that you do simple things like, you know, make sure they're masked, and if you are doing things with your monitor on, you know, and screen projecting in your classroom, you have those things turned off so children can't see them. Be mindful of over the shoulder things when you're typing things in, children can't see that as well. Implementing things like 2FA or MFA, you know, again, there's many schools that I work with. These are still problems and issues that many schools face, making sure that everyone sort of adheres and sticks to those guidelines. But they're there for a reason, aren't they? Right, to help make sure, you know, data and personal information is kept safe and secure. And so, yeah, just making sure you've got evidence of those things in place. These are things that are going to be checked for, and so again, having the paperwork in place to make sure that anyone who comes in to do any sort of checking on these sorts of things is really clear that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're in governance, and I'm sure you've got sort of points you could bring in on this as well, Al, with your various sort of school governance hats, but making sure that if you are in governance, you are asking questions around this and ask to see these things yourself to make sure just that, you know, schools are doing the things that they should be doing to keep young people safe.
I think
that's a really good point.
The only bit I would add on there, Mark, and that's a really helpful and a juicy summary there of all the core bits, is that most of the weak points in our systems, no matter how much we do with the technology and we undertake our different certifications, will be the human being. And so actually a lot of it feeds into that start out academic year and continuing through the academic year, reminding staff about their core cybersecurity, the way that they follow the school's acceptable use policies that follow around the use of IT. Many schools, certainly in England, will have their school insurance, so that's RPA insurance funded from the government. There's requirements in there that every member of staff and everybody associated with the school, including governors, have undertaken their own basic cybersecurity training course and recorded that validation every year, because it is typically the human in the loop that clicks on that PDF that says urgent, pay details, update, open it, and then realize at that point they're part of the school network. Now, I'm simplifying for effect. That builds along all those other strands Mark talks about. And ironically, the bit I would just swear from a techie perspective, I suppose, in one regard, is we tend to look at our infrastructure and the things that are our vulnerabilities in terms of the things we can see. Often we need to do a deeper dive and look at all those switches and routers and other things that are hidden, that are the transport, the network around our schools. If they aren't updated with the latest firmware, if they aren't up to date, then often they become a hidden vulnerability as well. So there's quite a lot to see. But yeah, definitely check out and listen to Gary Henderson. He's always a fountain of great ideas on that topic.
Thank you. Some really good points in that. I did actually read a report today from Secure Schools about the effectiveness of cybersecurity, and one of the things it mentioned is that email continues to be one of those key risks with phishing and things like that. So, but that there's a lack of training. So having that at least annual training is really important, like you mentioned. Thinking about, obviously, Mark, you mentioned like evidence. Al, how can IT teams evidence compliance to governors and inspectors, and what data should leaders be asking to see on that?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, we can focus a little bit or sharpen our pencil by the fact that we now have an obligation, certainly in multi-academy trusts around England, that we need to provide a termly risk register. That's the list of all the risks and vulnerabilities for our schools. And we might think a risk register is some of the obvious stuff, but it's everything from what happens if we have a cyber attack, to what happens if we find RAC in our building, to what about our inability to recruit staff because of the pressures and workload, to all sorts of different things. And cybersecurity is one where the two measures for a risk index typically are how big an impact will it be if it happened, and how likely is it to happen. And when it comes to cybersecurity, or the risk when it happens to us, you can imagine both are fairly high up that ranking on a multiplier. So what can you show? Well, the first thing is regularly we need to be able to evidence that we've got a full inventory, a full analysis of all of the devices and technology that exists within our IT estate. What have we actually got? What versions of technology and software are on it? So we can think about recent events like the demise or the end of Windows 10. And if we don't update, then we lose the ability to get Microsoft patches and fixes. We can also provide a list that ties in with our data protection impact assessments of all the different software or apps that we're using, to make sure we're really clear on which apps have been checked and approved for where the data is stored, who has access to it, how long for, and of course, where that data is. So we can then report back, hopefully as a team, when it comes to the broader IT. We have regular updates on our IT asset management, what software apps we've got. Actually, there's a really good benefit, a side win, which is all those subscriptions. You always figure out stuff that you're paying for that you're not actually using anymore. So you can often find a few nuggets of savings. And we can make sure we kind of package all around it. And then we move on to the stuff which is more linked to some of those changes, or it's always been there, the filtering and monitoring side, which we can go on to, which is kind of more about how do we actually evidence that we're monitoring and doing that effectively and safely. But it's about consistency and routine. But ironically, Mark and I always say, people talk about a digital strategy, they think you're going to bring out a catalogue of things you could buy. And it's always about look backwards and see what you've got and how you could use it more purposefully and safely already.
Moving on to that filtering and monitoring now, obviously the DFE filtering and monitoring standards and generative AI guidance have been signposted now within KCSIE. What does this mean in practice for school systems, policies and procurement?
Well, obviously, there's a requirement for you to have some form of filtering or monitoring on your school network. So I guess if you buy a product and install it and walk away, job done, it's a tick in the box. Well, actually, the guidance now is actually about providing evidence that you're actually using it and embedding those tools. So the key messaging, I guess, was one, the demonstrating that you're actually utilizing, have active management, not just an installation of the technology, so that you're using it for filtering or monitoring. That now includes not just the typical websites, applications, but now extends to identifying what are AI applications and what is being generated within those. Now, there's an interesting kind of tension here, because when we say AI application, we've kind of got stuff that's ingrained within our tools. So, you know, if we're Office 365, we're going to have Copilot sat there, and then we're going to have third-party websites that we've done our DPIAs on, hopefully, that we're also using. And so then we're wanting to capture what students are typing in and what they're copying and pasting from those. And there's a tension here in terms of the language, because, you know, the idea of seeing everything that's generated and everything a child sees, well, we're in a position where we can't really be recording anything and everything. And if we did, there's no way a human being could sit and watch it all back. Nor will it be helpful when we think about border data protection. So this is about looking for signs and indicators that there's a child that might be placing themselves at harm or risk, accessing inappropriate content, and how we steer through from that. It does make sure that we show we've got updated policies. Some folks will have tools that allow you to send out your policies and actually record evidence when staff have actually read them, which is another good way of making sure you've done it. And also, you know, I would argue something that many folks, Mark probably top of the list amongst a small handful that spend a lot of their time doing, is it all actually starts with building confidence for staff in what AI actually is, what those tools are, how to use them safely. The best tool isn't technology, it's skills, competency, agency, and using the right tools at the right time. So it really builds around that. I did make a little list because, you know, as I say, the grey hair sometimes gets in the way there, which is you do need to signpost who's actually responsible, the roles and responsibilities for monitoring IT stuff. You need to make sure that you evidence that you're reviewing it on an annual basis. I'd argue that's probably a little bit lax, frankly, in the scheme of things. Blocking harmful and inappropriate content, well, we all start at different levels, whether it's from our ISP upwards in terms of blocking stuff. So Internet Watch Foundation, big shout out there. Obviously we have links for them as well, but there'll be other measures as well as the interactive stuff. Monitoring strategies, having staff awareness to make sure the right decisions. I'm not a fan of all the automated monitoring and outcome. I like something that monitors and alerts a human being to use their professional judgment and context around the child to make a decision about risk. And then if there's something relevant, that can feed up to a safeguarding solution like CPOMs or something else. So yeah, I probably missed some bits there, but luckily there's two of us to answer your question, so we should be good.
Yeah, actually feeding in as well to what you mentioned around like confidence for staff and things like that. Mark, how can schools balance safeguarding with keeping technology actually usable for teaching and learning?
Thanks, Kat. I mean, you jumped straight in with the thing I was going to talk about, really, which is about, you know, how can you, enable young people to use, and teachers to use technology without sort of being so aggressive with your blocking and monitoring and all the rest of it that it can't be used at all. And so it's about proportionality in many ways, cognizance of things as well, which links into what I was sharing around, that confidence and competence piece, making sure that staff and young people are aware of the signposts and what to look for. And it's also interesting then, I mean, we might talk about this later, but the RSHE stuff about, misinformation and fake news and deep fakes and all these sort of things, making sure that, because you have to monitor, you have to filter, right? But best will in the world, some things will get through. So what do you do in those sort of scenarios? And it links into what I was sharing earlier as well, around cybersecurity. We all have fire drills, don't we? I can't remember who shared this advice with me back along, but I share it with all my schools now. And trust now, you'll have fire drills how many times a year to practice what happens when, if in worst case scenario there were to be a fire. But what do you do about having any drills around what to do if you are attacked, if you were to find some malware on your network? What do you do? So having drills and practicing these things beforehand, I think is useful. I'll mention again, shout outs for things like the Internet Watch Foundation, UK Safer Internet Centre lists. These sort of things can really help you in your filtering and monitoring and knowing what to look for, and finding where your sort of benchmarks are. But again, a lot of it comes down to the human and relationships. And so if you're working in IT and within the network team, consulting with teachers, finding out what it is they want to use, getting a really good understanding of what tools are out there and things that they can then monitor and track and allow or not allow, in the moment, can really help to, understand what staff need access to, what children need access to, and reviewing things on a regular basis. The goal ultimately really is to make sure that pupils, children, are safe without putting any sort of unnecessary risks or barriers in the ways of their learning. And so there is no sort of, these are the exact things you should do. It's all about nuance and context within your setting. But having a, think about some of those things we've just been sharing about, myself and Dal together, will help put you in a good place, I think.
Yeah, I really like what you said about having drills as well. It's definitely something that schools can take away and have a think about. So Al, putting your kind of chair of a multi-academy trust hat on for a minute, what does good governance look like for approving and auditing AI tools in the classroom?
Well, obviously, the default response for anybody who's chair of a multi-academy trust is to reply, "Can't afford that," before the conversation starts, just to clarify the position for most of us. Of course, I say that in jest. We all have different ways to try and find things. And this is the most important thing, because good governance is largely free, although never undervalue the role of a good governance professional within your multi-academy trust supporting you. So the biggest bit when it comes to tracking any of these kind of digital tools for me is about actually evidence of the approval and auditing route. So actually, first and foremost, where are the risk assessments for any tools that we do? We can say AI, but let's just assume this is any digital tool, and then we just add on maybe some extra questions on the end. But fundamentally, this is about making the right decisions. And there's always this tension between the pedagogical, I want this tool because it's going to be great and it's got great resources, and the technical, yeah, but it's hosted in somewhere that we really don't want data being hosted in, or we don't have any evidence of security on it. But the most important thing from governance is actually who did the risk assessment, who requested it, who approved it, when was it actually recorded as being something that's suitable. That makes sure that we can say when that was done, part of that process should be the checks and balance against the DfE compliance. That's the same for anything. And when I say data and digital, no difference to changing your CCTV system. Anything that's holding data of value, identifiable data, is important. Then there's also the second part, which is having the audit trails of use, particularly around AI tools, and also the safeguarding incidents that are linked to that. So let's take it on different levels. If we were talking about a sharing of data accidentally, again, via that number one mechanism of email or something else, we'd be reporting that to our data protection officer, and we'd be not only making sure we took the steps to mitigate it, but we'd also be creating a log in our record of where we had a data breach. And if that data breach was sufficiently significant, we'd be telling the ICO about it, or we'd be taking evidence in the steps. And in the same way, we would have a record that shows the applications that we use and where we have any kind of evidence of monitoring on the AI usage. So often, if you've got a central tenancy school network, depending on your flavor, you'll be able to see some of the activities and the history that relates to the tool that's being used. On other tools, you make sure you put the right guardrails and so on in place. And then your next layer is that you have some form of appropriate filtering and monitoring. And actually, filtering and monitoring is not a big stick. It's quite the opposite. Actually, nobody wants to spot something a child's doing and go and berate a child for doing it, because that's the best way to take the problem out of school and make the problem occur somewhere where there isn't the wraparound support and nurture. More often than not, it becomes the intelligence to signpost whole school assemblies, year group assemblies about topics that seem to be trending or on trend. So it's using it in a different way, but evidencing that's in place. That's no different than a termly review of the single central record or something else we're doing from a safeguarding perspective. And then I suppose the other important bit, which flips it the other way around, is actually there's onus on your trustees, ultimately your board of directors of your multi-academy trust, and your governors, to actually have sufficient awareness and understanding and training themselves of some of these risks, and to better understand and articulate why we're using these tools. Again, the why is often more important than the how and the what, and absolutely to be able to ask the right challenging questions. I've spent probably a few too many Saturday mornings over the last 6 months doing governor training days for different trusts all over the place, talking around not just AI, but AI and other tools, and about how governors should be asking the right questions, what those questions look like, and how can we have confidence. And you know what? Good leadership in a school or Matt should really value those challenges and questions, because it will help reassure them that they've already thought through what is, sadly, a constantly moving feast of risks. So I guess those are the main bits, Kat.
Yeah, you're right. It's constantly moving as well, but there's some really good advice in there to help them keep navigating through that. One thing I wanted to have a focus on was the 4Cs model, especially now it explicitly includes misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Mark, how can this be integrated into RSHE and online safety lessons?
Thanks, Kat. I mean, I think this is a great opportunity, just not just in those areas, but right across the curriculum. Because for me, it's about critical thinking. And if you look at the latest sort of thinking in a world where young people are often using AI themselves and educators themselves, and why wouldn't they? Actually, having critical thinking as part of your curriculum and trying to promote that as best you can is definitely something that will be of benefit to all really. But again, teaching young children about how to evaluate sources, and again, that flips back nicely around things like citation, making sure that you actually credit and reference within your work and things as well. I was helping my son do exactly that just recently, and talking about the importance of citation. It's something that's really, really important. And if you can't balance check the things that you find, then it does open up those sort of bigger questions. So evaluating sources, looking for sort of manipulation techniques, and that ties in again to your overall kind of cybersecurity and awareness stuff, not just for teachers, but for young people as well. And understanding why misinformation spreads and the things that can happen behind the scenes. We've seen things around elections, just taking things in the UK and the US as an example, and being mindful of influencer programs and that sort of stuff, and how that can sort of tie in. If you're looking for some resources around that, I've actually made some for us here at NetSupport. They're available via the classroom.cloud website. Simply go to classroom.cloud/digital-citizenship, and there's a whole bunch of things around there. But I think it starts with making sure that we're supporting everyone in our community to be mindful of what's happening right in front of them. There is, of course, that wider opportunity as well, recognizing that the school community isn't just young people and teachers, but you've got that broader community. I think about my mum, older people within the community, the grands and granddads, mentioning no names, Mr. Kingsley, of this world, who sometimes do worry and wonder around all these things as well. And then there's a lovely way in which you can sort of bring that stuff into the curriculum by making it so that young people can support people within their own families and all sorts of things besides. So making it just part of, and again, like with all these things we're talking about, making it part of fabric of everything that you do within your setting, I think is a good place to start.
Kat, can I jump in with an extra granddad comment now that Mark's picked on me?
Yeah.
I was going to say, sometimes, we talk about stuff because they've been around a while and we just assume that everyone's kind of up to speed on it. And I always like when I see little summary charts that just signpost, let's have some plain English, what content really is, which is just anything that's posted online, including your text, images and videos. And contact is just that risk associated with interactions between users online. Conduct is what happens when that behavior online is exhibited, and commerce is anything that's linked to all those things such as gambling and phishing. And I always remember a great session by someone who I really rate highly when it comes in the safeguarding space, Alan McKenzie, who was talking around digital disinhibition and that conversation about how young people communicate in a digital space in a very different way to the inhibitions they might have face-to-face with other human beings. And so, like many topics, AI being the biggest one because it impacts on rethinking our curriculum and many other things, I think it has become, and this update on KCSIE has become another catalyst to revisit the broader digital citizenship piece with our learners. And that's exactly where, if we wind the clock forward 10 years for those learners, or maybe 5 years, depending on where they are on their journey, the skills they'll acquire are the bits that employers are looking for that will differentiate them from the mainstream things that technology can already do in the workplace. So it's never been more important. I'm a big advocate of right now we need the right tools in place to make sure that we can offer and signpost that support and intervention and empower good educators to make the right and informed decisions. But one day, everyone will know how to keep themselves safe and conduct themselves in the right way online, he says. Fingers crossed, toes crossed, and all the rest.
So, Al, how can technology support staff confidence to respond to online misinformation and track concerning trends?
It's a really good one, isn't it? Because it's a constantly moving feast and it's a constantly moving avenue. Now, I argue, and I think most tools, that as much when they're used effectively, are about providing staff with confidence and giving often a bit of a heads up of trending topics in advance, providing insights in what those topics or those particular phrases that seem to suddenly be reoccurring really mean. So are about signposting and informing staff to be more comfortable and conscious in the conversations that they need to have. And there is a challenge here that whenever we talk about how do we build confidence for staff in these areas, we make an assumption that all staff are confident in understanding the detail and nuance of these ever-changing risks and threats. So I do think that the technology that certainly we offer and others is about providing those shortcuts that will alert your designated safeguarding lead or your safeguarding staff to patterns, whether it's searches, clicks involving kind of misinformation, let you track so that you can get real-time monitoring of misinformation, and also because you can create, you know, word clouds and reports, anonymized stuff, you can have the conversations that can be scenario based, that can then be woven into your conversations about what do these look like and how would we look at things that and the efficacy and evidence of what those things are. You know, so I would argue digitalism provides the resources to allow you to perhaps challenge and start the conversation in the classroom. There are lots of online resources out there that help in a more detailed level. I mean, I know the NetSupport team have produced quite a few resources around everything from a teacher, a student, a parent perspective in making sure we can navigate this digital world. So absolutely check out that fantastic resources area. But I do think increasingly linking in with some of these updates we've seen with KCSIE in the curriculum, this is about providing some real world data and topics to provide some real-based, problem-based learning in the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great approach. So Mark, looking a bit more at RSHE and digital safeguarding, with the revised RSHE becoming statutory next September 2026, what should schools do now to align their curriculum with the technical safeguarding measures?
Thanks, Kat. And it's interesting that Alder shared the things that he did, because I mean, I was going to jump in, but I was mindful of the question that was coming. But if you've got access to tools that can pull through some of this information through your filtering and monitoring measures, anonymize that data, but use it to inform any lessons that you're sharing. It shows real life patterns of risk. You don't have to share, names and say, did you see that Kingsley was doing this? Anonymize it, obviously. One of the best things I've seen done and of clearly magpied it for my own purposes is when I'm doing online safety or digital parenting sessions with my client schools. I'm there with parents, and we will survey the young people to find out about their gaming habits, their social media habits, all these things, anonymized it, and then sharing it with parents, because children don't often share this information with their parents. You ask them for their children's perspectives on their parents' use of technology, and it makes for quite amusing conversations and the rest of it. But again, it really opens up and highlights the issues and the thinking and activities that go on that you might not otherwise be aware of. And so utilizing the information that you've got can really help to inform those lessons, show real life patterns of risk, and it can be used for all sorts of things beyond the classroom, like I say, around parental engagement, digital parenting, and ways in which you can interweave that then into the curriculum, not just within RSHE lessons as well, because you can use that data to inform let's say the physics department, how much time children are spending, working on their physics work, because the monitoring data will help sort of feed that through, not just physics, obviously other subjects there as well. So mapping that against the sort of safeguarding measures means you'll be ready and have that stuff in place. And obviously then you're best protecting not just young people, but supporting staff in the ways in which they can do these things as well.
Brilliant. So Al, with working together to safeguard attendance now being statutory, how can schools use technology to integrate attendance data into safeguarding workflows and early intervention?
Difficult one, isn't it? Everything's attendance. And I suppose there's a little bit of empathy here, which is whilst we've got a national focus on attendance and attendance leads and hubs and all sorts going on, there isn't fundamentally a significant shift in what's being shared as best practice to schools that they aren't already trying themselves every day of the week and have been doing for some time. But I think we can probably draw a parallel here, which is a reasonable linkage when it comes to safeguarding and attendance, that we should be linking triggers for unexpected or unexplained absences directly into the safeguarding workflow. So we can use some of our digital tools to identify when students aren't using technology, aren't signed in today. Obviously, we've got a traditional method of absences and attendance that tie in that with that. But I think we can then link that into perhaps providing alerts and notifications when we recognise that there's gaps there. And we can also link attendance patterns with safeguarding chronologies. So maybe we look at when there's been different safeguarding incidents and whether they align with absences. I think in truth, there are two pieces of additional information that are really important to allow that human risk calculation to be assigned against them. But what we're seeing with the latest iteration of KCSIE is more of an alignment of recognising that absence isn't just a loss of learning, it's also incrementing its risk from a safeguarding perspective.
Brilliant, thank you, Al. Mark, thinking from a leadership focus, what 3 actions should school leaders take this term to demonstrate compliance with the updated KCSIE guidance?
Great, thank you, Kat. I can recognise we're getting close to the end, and I want to just be really, really quick with these because I don't think it's about over complicating things. I think it's just some simple, actionable steps. So the first thing I would do is get onto the DFE's planning technology for your school self-assessment form. So go into there and complete that, so you can get a real good mark on where you're at with technology within your school and/or trust. It shows that leadership and governance are engaged, and will give you some pointers for moving forwards, and record all of that as well, obviously. Secondly, update your online safety and staff training to include things like misinformation, disinformation, AI risks, all those things we mentioned earlier. And then finally, about reviewing that filtering and monitoring provision, making sure it's fit for purpose against those standards, and make sure you've obviously documented that as part of your annual review. Make sure that any escalation routes are clearly sort of marked and identified and communicated with people so they know what to do if there is a problem. So simple 3 things.
Love that, Mark. Nice and simple, which is exactly what people need after digesting so much information as well. And Al, kind of linking into this, what pitfalls should leaders avoid when updating their policies, technical systems, and staff training?
I guess there's an over-reliance sometimes on just keeping with legacy policies rather than being a bit more focused in terms of what the updates are and what their requirements really are. I think we probably struggle sometimes to not always evidence actual oversight of our filtering and monitoring. So it's often they're passive installations rather than active installations. And I think there's increasing requirement now and an expectation on leaders to make sure the tools are being used for their purpose to keep children safe. So that's probably good. And then the biggest one, it's not intended, but it's a nature of a very pressurized system and capacity. That the biggest pitfall to avoid is neglecting staff training, neglecting the opportunity to give staff the confidence. We all have to start the school year and sign off that we've all read the KCSIE, particularly some of the backing schedules, but actually to be familiar with what some of the online risks are, what the statutory attendance responsibilities are, and also what some of those risks actually mean so that they feel comfortable engaging in the right conversations and discussions around it. That'd be my 3.
Thank you, Al. That was great. Brilliant points from both of you. I feel like this could have been a 7-hour discussion, but unfortunately we do need to wrap up. So I just want to end it on if there are any resources that anyone has to share that they think would be useful, and any final thoughts. Also, if anyone did watch this webinar and feels there's a question that hasn't been answered, please do engage with us on social media. We'd love to help you with that as well. So Al, did you want to go first with any final thoughts or any resources you want to share?
I think within this, we've mentioned a couple of times that we have a habit and an intent to provide a really rich set of resources on our website that provide lots of other bits. I've done it with many school systems mapped around the country at different times for different reasons. But if I'm listening to this and looking what's happening within your own schools and multi-academy trust, you find there's a gap in provision. And that gap in provision is problematic because you haven't got a budget to mitigate right now. My offer and advice would be reach out, and where we can, we will always, for want of a better term, lend you a solution for a few months to cross that bridge and make sure that you don't have a gap where you think you're keeping your children safe online, but are actually missing a trick.
And Mark,
great stuff there. Can I just jump in with a few? Yeah, thanks, Kat. He wouldn't do it himself, but beyond the resources that are available through NetSupport, I'll signpost one thing, which is Al's weekend newsletter, tirelessly putting all these things together. If you want to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in all the areas we've been discussing today, his newsletter is absolutely stellar, and will give you all the signposting for all the rich information you need. So there you go, Mr. Kingsley, one for you. The other one I would say really is just to, we hear this in conversations around AI, around making sure there's human in the loop. And as we've highlighted a number of times throughout the conversation today, just don't neglect. It's about culture, relationships, people. It's unfortunately often, people that can often be the reason why some of these things fall down and don't work as well as they should do. And so keeping the conversation, making sure it's not something that happens in isolation once a year and just becomes an integral part of everything that you do within your school, making sure that change management and culture is there. I think, getting the technology right is, in the scheme of things, often relatively easy. Making sure that people are on top of things is often not as easy as getting the technology right. So that would be my final little thought, really, just making sure that people, young people and adults, get as much support as possible to keep that conversation going, because safeguarding is something that takes place every day. We're all responsible for it. So keep that focus.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for your insights today. And thank you to everyone who is watching as well. And like I said, if there's anything that you think we missed that you'd love to hear more about, please do reach out to us. We'd love to help you.